Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I think we're ready to get started. So, I'm Nancy, and I'm a member of Amplify Ryerson. I'm a third-year criminology student here at Ryerson University, and I'm going to be your host for this workshop. Please note that you are welcome to turn your cameras on for this session, as there will be various elements of interactivity. We will be using Slido to communicate throughout the session. You will see a button at the top of the video player that says Engage. Click on Engage to submit any questions you have for our speaker and to communicate with other participants. So today we'll be covering the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media and how to leverage that power to make political change through things like boycotts, digital campaigns, and informal discussion spaces. So we'll be tackling questions as to how social media facilitates these new forms of engagement. So this workshop is going to start off with a presentation by our speaker and with some guided questions after, followed by kind of like an audience Q&A. So our workshop speaker today is Danielle Jocelyn Otu. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
That's
Okay,
great.
awesome. Or AKA DJ. So DJ developed a passion for brand development and marketing upon the creation of her own platform for women. After obtaining a bachelor's degree in human relations and organizational development from Concordia University, she went on to provide organizations big and small with her brand strategy and social impact enterprise. Now a seasoned professional in the field, she followed the call to community work and is currently specializing in social innovation design at Penn State University, while leading the communications and innovation strategy for youth-led organization Apathy is Boring. Her hope is to help leaders, organizations, and institutions come up with innovative, human-centered solutions to the challenges we are collectively facing as a society. With that being said, thank you so much for being here, DJ, and over to you just to kind of introduce more about yourself, your organization, and to present.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I mean, if you are comfortable putting your camera on, please do, so that I don't feel like I'm, just chatting to a screen, but also it's 11 a.m. and we're all tired. So I totally get if you choose not to. As Nancy mentioned, my name is Danielle Jocelyn Otu. I am the Communications and Innovation Director at Apathy is Boring. Just as a show of hands, I can't really see your hands. As a reaction, can I know who is familiar with Apathy is Boring? Reaction is like at the bottom of the Zoom. If you click next to, I believe, I don't know if we see the same thing actually.
Oh yeah, they're going through feed loop, so they might not be able to.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, Allison, how did you do that? I don't know how she did that. But Allison said yes, so I'm hoping.
Yeah. If you're on feed loop, you can probably click the more tab, and there'll probably be ways to react there.
Okay. So I'll ask again if you're on feed loop. How many folks are aware of Apathy is Boring or have heard about Apathy is Boring in the past? No? All right. Well, okay. Well, I'll tell you all about it. No worries. As Nancy also mentioned, prior to joining Apathy is Boring, I had a seasoned experience in marketing and communications. I was the head of strategy at a marketing agency that shall remain unnamed because I hated it. I did not like it at all. And increasingly, actually, as I was doing marketing and as I was getting better at marketing, I was realizing that, if I was going to be doing what I do, which I like to think I do well, I really wanted it to serve and to be for a cause or a purpose that I felt was serving my community. And so I joined the Apathy is Boring team almost 3 years ago now. And it's really with this same kind of marketing lens that because I have a solid team now, have built what I think and what I dare to say myself, a pretty amazing communication strategy that I'm hoping to share a little bit more with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here, can you folks see this?
Yeah.
I forget that you can't answer me. Okay, so as you may or may not know, Canada has had a long-term trend of low youth voter turnout at all levels of government, so federal, provincial, municipal levels. And in a recent, well, this is not so recent anymore because we did another one this year, but in 2019, we did a study in partnership with Abacus Data. And that study reflected that 50% of young Canadians reported that they have little to no interest in politics, which obviously is alarming, but also kind of telling of how disconnected youth are from our political systems. Obviously, online disinformation really contributes to the public trust that folks have in our institutions. And over half of Canadian youth that we had surveyed at the time kind of see deliberate political misinformation at least once a week online. So for us, that's like a little bit of a correlation there between folks reporting that they have no interest in politics and then the amount of misinformation that they are fed with or that they consume online. But then also the low youth voter trend that was reflected in Canadian democracy. So for those who haven't heard our story or who know us through social media but don't really kind of know how long we've been around or how the organization started, Apathy is Boring was actually founded in 2004. So we're pushing on 20 years of existence, which is quite major for, a lot of these, a lot of the organizations that we're seeing in the civic space have been there for a few years, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 max, but we're pushing on 20 years in the field and have garnered a lot of, research and information as a result of that, and notoriety and credibility. And the organization was actually founded when a choreographer, a filmmaker, and a fashion photographer met at a party. This is a real story. And they bonded over the fact that few of their friends were planning on voting in that coming election. And I believe that was like the 2005 or 2006 election. And so they were just like, how are none of our friends participating? We have to do something. And so at the time, they were very much in like the artistic scene. So they started kind of mobilizing within their communities, within their friends. And because it was unheard of at the time, they kind of garnered a lot of attention, both in the media, but within the community, the local community as well, based in Montreal. I forgot to mention that. And so today, 17 years later, we've grown into a national organization that supports and educates youth aged 18 to 30 in becoming contributing citizens in Canada's democracy. We are 100% youth-led. There's not a single one of us on the team. We are about 30 people now across the country, full-time staff that is under the age of 35. We've run 6 Get Out the Vote federal elections. I'm going to touch on the point of the voter turnout increasing dramatically in the next slide, but kind of put a pin on that. And over the last 2 years, we've reached over 2 million impressions on social media and have run our largest federal election campaign since the foundation of the organization. And I like to, I'll take a little bit of a brag for my team there, but again, we have a solid communications team that really does an amazing job and takes so much heart and passion into engaging local youth. So, taking the pin out of the last comment, you can see since in 2005, a significant peak in the 2015 election in youth voter engagement. There are many speculations as to why this could be, notably, Justin Trudeau and the fact that he was the youngest prime minister to run, the policies that he was offering, the kind of excitement and enthusiasm around his campaign, but also a study came out following the 2015 election inquiring, what happened? What is this phenomenon that led such a drastic peak in youth voter turnout? And 1/3 of youth who responded to that survey mentioned that they were asked or engaged by a Get Out to Vote organization. At the time, there wasn't many. So that led to a very big realization on our part, both in terms of the importance of the work that we do, the potential for impact that we have, but also the refining of our approach, and really how to make sure that the youth that we're reaching were really reflective of Canada's democracy, both from a cultural perspective, but also a diverse and equity lens. And so we kind of revised our strategy a little bit, where the organization used to be focused solely on Get Out the Vote campaigns. We now have run 3 programs. So the vote campaigns are light touch, right? So they are broad impact and they reach millions of individuals across Canada. However, where we realized that the impact was minimizing with the vote campaigns was that we weren't necessarily reaching unengaged youth. So unengaged youth tend to be BIPOC youth, racialized youth, youth with gender differences, and LGBTQ+ youth, basically youth on the margins who require a lot more intervention and kind of moving along the engagement ladder in order to then go out and vote than a youth who has been actively engaging their whole life and has been president of this club and part of the Young Greens of this club. And so we revised our strategy a little bit to ensure that we can also reach the youth on the margins who rightfully have a little bit of a harder time engaging with the institutions and our systems as they exist today. This is how our RISE program was built. Our RISE program has deep action. So we work one-on-one directly with youth and their community in 7 communities across the country. So we have local hubs in Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Halifax. That's 8 communities actually. And we work directly again with them for a cohort of 5 months long in order to engage them, to guide them in engaging through their community more directly through community building projects. So every year we change the theme up. The last year and a half has been on gender inclusion. Before that, we had a theme of environment. Before that, social inclusion. So we'll pick kind of general themes. Most of them tend to be in line with the SDG goals. And we'll have them create a community project that affects their local communities in order for them to witness the impact of their actions, in order for them to see that, oh, okay, I have the ability to directly impact my community in this ways, and that therefore builds confidence for them to then go out and engage with their democratic institutions. If you follow us on social media, you may have noticed this week that we relaunched our youth-friendly program, which is a program that we were running when the organization was first founded, that worked directly with democratic institutions in order to help make these spaces more youth-friendly. At the time we were working, there was a lot of talk around millennials and, adapting to millennials because millennials were entering the workforce and we were so different and we were so, these unicorns of human beings that needed to be understood. And it's funny because now us as millennials, a lot of us, we're working now with Gen Z and we're seeing the Gen Z as unicorns. So the roles have flipped there and we're slowly getting old. But all this to say that we've relaunched this program that has indirect impact. So we work around with third-party organizations again, mostly democratic institutions and organizations, in order to help them create spaces for youth the same way that we do with our RISE program, to empower youth in their own decision-making in order for them to, again, take back that confidence in themselves and in our institutions that they've built, and apply that back to their democratic engagement. So we kind of firmly believe that a key component of youth engagement is having them involved in these decision-making spaces and empowering them to engage with our systems that, tend to not do so, in order for there to be a shift, a permanent shift is what we'd like to see in their voter turnout. It's kind of like our theory of change there. So, youth-led democratic innovation is a framework that we have been building and working on for the past 4 years through our RISE program. We really, really wanted to shift this narrative that youth are apathetic and rather reframe it around the fact that today's youth are engaging with our systems in different ways, because a lot of them traditionally either don't trust the systems, don't understand them due to their lack of accessibility, are completely disenfranchised by them. They've found their own way, and by they I mean we, because I'm a youth, we found our own way to create change in ways that we deem accessible and meaningful and impactful. And while they are not formal ways of engaging in our democracy, they're still just as important. And a healthy democracy is one that allows you to, engage in these informal ways, so social media, community engagement, cultural production. A lot of times today, going vegan is a form of political activism. Attending a climate strike, creating a hashtag online, all of these are forms of political engagement that youth are leading, but aren't necessarily recognized as civic engagement. And so a healthy democracy really, really acknowledges both the informal ways that today's youth are taking part in our systems, and then the formal ways, so having them also vote and also engage in our democratic institutions in order for there to be that symbiosis. So again, instead of youth are apathetic, we're really reframing it as these community-based, non-institutional social movement oriented forms of self-actualizing citizenship. So we kind of call it DIY democracy. Engagement, they're attracting youth in unprecedented numbers, disproving assumptions that young people are mostly opting out of our democracy. So it's not that we're opting out, it's not that we don't care, it's not that we rather sit around and order our avocado toast or whatever crazy assumptions exist about millennials and Gen Z. It's that we're doing so in the ways that we deem are more impactful and closer to us because the systems have become so inaccessible. And so youth-led democratic innovation is an approach to youth engagement that creates space for youth to lead through a combination of empowering roles. So you have one, youth as movement leaders. We'll see in the next slides that the last year has been a year of movements, not only a year of movements, but a year of youth-led movements, whether it be the climate strike, whether it be the Black Lives Matter strike, you name it. These are very much youth-led movements, and recognizing them as so is critical to empowering youth to continuing their engagement with our institutions. Then you have youth as creative organizers. So example, starting social enterprises, co-creation of institutional programs, and then you have youth as decision makers. So, getting out the vote, literally, and, partaking in policy analysis. And then in between those, I'm like pointing to my screen as if you can see me. In between all of these, you have examples. So a youth as movement leaders, youth as creative organizers, you have our RISE program and many other kind of youth-led programs that we're witnessing pop up in these spaces. And then between youth as movement leaders and youth as decision makers, you have the Get Out the Vote programs, campaigns. So this all goes to show that there are nuances in civic engagement that need to be taken into consideration, and not only looking at the ballot box as a defining measure of civic engagement. Particularly, I like to stress when it comes to youth who are not used to engaging with the system because they've been oppressed by it, because they've been dismissed by it, because they don't feel seen by it. So now, why are people using social media and sharing information on social media? 84% do so to support a cause or issues they feel strongly about. 94% share to pass valuable information. 49% of these respondents influence action about products by sharing. 68% use social sharing to build image and demonstrate who they are and what they stand for. 78% share to interact, grow, get a sense of fulfillment, nurture relationships, and stay in touch with others. 69% do so to participate and feel involved in things happening in the world. So as we can see, there's this growing trend of sharing on social media, not just for any reason, right? The way that youth are sharing, and this is not actually not pertaining to youth specifically, but I'd say the way that the world is engaging with social media has a lot more to do with the sharing of information and causes that they feel strongly about and that are closely tied to their identity as human beings. I realize that this is an issue for folks to start typing, but can they type in, what is it called again? Vivo? No.
Feedloop?
What is it called?
Feedloop.
Oh, Feedloop, right. Can they type in Feedloop?
They can.
Like chat?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Okay, so Feedloop folks, or folks who are tuning in, just for context, we're on Zoom, so we don't see the same thing in case you're like, what is this girl talking about? If you can please share why you share on social media and what kinds of things that, oh, thank you. Allison says that she switched over to Zoom, which is easier to participate. Thank you. I invite you to do the same if anybody feels the same way. But if you are on Feedloop, if you want to share why you share on social media and specifically what you share.
I guess I can kind of like start off since I'll just
Mm-hmm.
say it out loud. But like, why do I share? I feel like, you know, like getting out there and like watching the news, sometimes the news is just boring to watch. And the way they present it is really boring to watch. And, you know, of course, you aren't going to get all of your news via Instagram or Twitter, but that's where you have to go in and take the initiative to make sure you fact check everything. And there are reliable sources and reliable organizations who have like mobilized, you know, this action onto a digital platform, which is more accessible for their audience. And I feel it's really useful because, you know, there's a lot of really, there's a lot of really quick info, but they're really useful when they're put into a shareable type of graphic that you can share into your story or send it to your friend. So that's why I share, because I feel like it educates me and it also educates, you know, the people around me, and I want people to kind of know what I care about and why something matters to me. So I tend to like what I share is like recently is like Asian hate and the violence that has been happening. There was BLM that happened, and so that's kind of the typical things that I shared. They're mostly oriented around social injustices and all that stuff, but
yeah, I hear you on that. There's definitely, what I heard you say was, you know, sharing because you feel like, one, the news sources that, you know, traditional news sources don't necessarily convey information in the most appealing ways. And so for you, social media is a platform or means for you not only to gain that information, but then redistribute it back to your community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that. I think for me also, I share, and I guess folks are having a hard time on Feedloop, but I share, so I have a kind of pillars of sharing. I'll share mostly, obviously, to inform on what's going on. But then, you know, meme culture is real. You know, I'll share to laugh. I'll share because I see something hilarious. And, you know, that's my way of engaging with my friends for the day. I'll share because I see something pretty that makes me dream, or like a destination, and I'm like, oh, I wish I was there. So there's so many kind of different ways, but mostly again for me, because I work in this space, obviously, is to inform. But there's also like a lighter um, touch to me sharing, and I think youth in general, and how we engage with meme culture is a reflection of that.
And for
Yeah.
you, DJ, you can't see in the chat, but
Oh no, I can't.
Adelina said, plus sharing news is educating. Would love to know more about like what kind of like products and stuff to share as well. Like, I think I'm not sure if I'm getting exactly what is being said, but I think it's, you know, when you share, it is a form of education, and that's what I find honestly too. Like things, I'm really glad that I have a social circle that kind of is willing to share posts on their story, and it's really intriguing because, you know, the more you see it share, the more you're just like, this matters to a lot of people.
Totally, 100%. Um, I was watching, so I don't have cable TV at home, and I think a lot of us, who live alone probably do not anymore. And so I went away last weekend, not out of town, relax, but I turned on the TV because I hadn't watched TV in years. And I watched the news and I realized, like, oh, wow, a lot of what the news are talking about, I've actually seen on social media. And I tended to think it was the opposite. So I think there's also been that shift in that the movements that take off on social media, oftentimes, I think right now, feed news stories, which is a very interesting phenomenon to observe because, 2-3 years ago, it was not the case. Adelina says, to clarify, I was curious about the last chart that said 49% of those surveyed that they shared product. What kind of product? Okay, products are like literally consumer products. So clothes, skincare, shoes, technology. I hope that makes sense. I think influencer culture also plays a big part, obviously, in social media and in the things that we share. So that's what they meant, consumer products. I hope that answers your question, Adelina. Are there any other questions, Nancy? Do I keep it going?
Just for the audience, if you have any comments, feel free to put it in the chat. But if you have any questions, you can hit the engage button and submit your questions there.
Great.
Back to you. Yeah.
Okay. So from connecting to impacting, these are some examples of movements that have started on social media and that have actually kind of led to tangible impacts. I don't know if folks are familiar. I think most people would recognize this kind of blue avatar that happened, I think, about 1.5 years ago. And it was in response to a Sudanese student who had been killed during the movements in Sudan and literally trickled as a worldwide phenomenon, which is fascinating, really, because as a protest that started literally in, the East Africa became very quickly a global phenomenon. Same for, obviously, the climate strikes, which is one of the largest youth-led movements of our time that began simply as a rallying cry from Greta Thunberg and led to organizations and protests around, I believe it was more than 500 countries, 500 cities across the world. And obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement, which has now actually been deemed as the biggest US movement in US history, which started as a hashtag on Twitter by 2 Black women and eventually led to protests again across the world calling against anti-Black racism. I'd also like to highlight that these movements, while they led to, a lot of them started digitally, led to in person, and then led to policy change and policy discussions. So just as a reflection of the impact that social media can have and how quickly one hashtag can become a movement, and not only a movement, but a policy consideration. So 7 areas affected by social media. 1, politics. Obviously, social networks play an increasingly important role in elections. I'm going to touch a little bit more on the, kind of the ugly side of that a little bit later, but it's impossible right now to run an electoral campaign without being active on social media. Both candidates and potential voters are actively looking at what's being posted, what's being shared, and that information actually feeds into their decision to vote or not for a particular candidate. The second area is society. Obviously, almost a quarter of the world's population is now on Facebook. So, and nearly 80% of all internet users in the US. Because social networks feed off of interactions among people, they become more powerful as they grow. And so social networks are they've naturally kind of emerged as a fundamental part of our society today. And I think Gen Z is the first generation that will grow up with social media literally being an integral part of their life from birth to death. So one of the ugly sides of social media, so I'm going to read this. It's a conversation amongst 2 people. One of them is saying, so you're going to change the world with an online petition, a Facebook status update, and a couple of retweets. And then the guy responds, you're right, I should probably share a few more links. So the flip side of social media is that it's slowly replacing real activism and replacing it with slacktivism and clicktivism. So it's this phenomenon that just by resharing a black square, just gonna put that out there, folks think that that's actually going to lead to change when that's not true. And again, back to stressing the importance of social movements, of social media movements, and the informal ways of youth engaging, but also the importance of real life activism and engagement with our democratic institutions, because those are the ones that have the ability right now, unfortunately, whether we like to admit it or not, to affect change. And I forgot to include a slide in here. Actually, maybe I can try to find it quickly. Here. Give me a second. This is totally unplanned, but I didn't want to do that. But I feel like it's kind of really relevant to what we're talking about. Yeah. Sorry, guys. I just really want to share this.
Hey, there's a question in the chat for you, and then also in the feedback chat, someone said, "Thank you for acknowledging this." Yeah.
Oh, thank you. What's the question? Do you want to read it for me?
And then the question is in the Zoom chat. I don't know if you're able to see it. Oh, you're muted right now.
Jeez. There you go. Can you talk about how social media could be used to encourage young people to vote, especially those who participate in democracy differently, in some of the ways you mentioned earlier, and don't feel the need to vote or see the value of voting? 100%. I will definitely touch upon this as we move along. I'm going to put a pin on that though, but it's a very good question, Allison. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share this. Can you see this? Great. So this is Apathy's Boring Shakers, Makers, and Uptakers. It's also one of our social change frameworks. And it acknowledges that there are different levels of powerful change makers at every level of society. So shakers are on the front line, raising awareness to a problem in society that needs to be solved. Oftentimes, these are activists, these are grassroots movements, these are folks who are literally on their streets and engaging with the problem directly, and they can flag the problem to makers. Makers then are creating and testing actionable solutions to the problems youth are facing in our communities. So, for example, Apathy is Boring's RISE program offers youth engagement and skills building opportunities year-round. Makers tend to be community organizations. So Apathy is Boring, the YMCA, DESTA Youth Network, all of these organizations that are actively engaging with the folks who are directly impacted by the issues that Shakers flag. And then you have uptakers. Uptakers are decision makers, members of parliament, or those within influential institutions. Solutions are taken up and scaled by people in positions of influence and power. And Apathy is Boring's nonpartisan vote activities provide resources and encourage youth to get out and vote in municipal, provincial, and federal elections. So uptakers tend to be, again, policy analysts, obviously our elected officials, and anybody working within influential spaces in order to affect the change, again, flagged by Shakers. So there are these three levels, according to us, of engagement happening, and one without the other, hence my point, cannot lead to effective change. So uptakers without Shakers, what leads to that is a disconnected democracy and disconnected policies and solutions that don't necessarily have a foot on the ground and truly understand the issues at hand. Shakers without uptakers lead to really good ideas, but that don't actually get implemented and just stay as really good ideas. So, defunding the police is probably a really great solution, but if we don't have uptakers to implement those, it's not going to work. And so a healthy democracy is this constant interaction between Shakers, makers, and uptakers, and acknowledging that every single player is key in making our social and society work. Does this make sense? I can't see you, but Nancy will be your voice. All right, so back to my presentation. I'm sorry, this is the totally unrelated, well, it's not unrelated, but I did want to share that point, and I forgot to add it in my presentation. So back to areas affected by social media. We have commerce now. Businesses have realized that they can use social media to generate insights, stimulate demand, and create product offerings. This also applies to community work. Also with commerce, more recently, that's not reflected in here, is particularly Gen Z and millennials. I believe it was at the last time I had checked, maybe 63% of them expect the businesses that they engage with to take a stance on issues that matter. The flip side of the commerce is that low numbers of social shares can lead to negative social proof and destroy business credibility. So you can have, a great idea, you can have the latest technology, but if you don't have the social backing, sometimes folks don't necessarily buy in. So social media creates that social buy-in. The working world, 60% of employers use social networking sites to research job candidates. Training and development, job candidates who develop skills on the latest and most advanced social media techniques are far more employable. And social media also has contributed to the increase in long distance online learning. Then you have the moral challenges of social media, obviously, the cyberbullying, the lack of privacy, the trolling, the misinformation. That last point is particularly important when it comes to our democracy. The last area affected by social media is obviously our personal relationships. So especially in the last year, we haven't actually taken the time to bond with one another and connect with one another. And so these kind of virtual bonds have taken place, but sometimes these bonds are not necessarily as meaningful as actual friendships. Bottom line, one of the most positive impacts of social media is in the distribution of information in today's world. Platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and others have made it possible to access information at the click of a button. So how does this apply to democracy, you may ask, and are probably sitting there wondering. So again, the great thing about the internet is everyone can be a publisher. The really bad thing about the internet is that everyone can be a publisher. More people are currently using the internet at this point than at any point in human history, and it's become flooded with bad information. In 2020, I believe it was last April, NewsGuard published a list of 36 websites. The number has probably tripled since then, peddling hoaxes related to the coronavirus. And just a month later, that list has ballooned to more than 200. With lockdown measures still in place, that line didn't finish, it didn't come through. With lockdown measures still in place, I was initially supposed to say that this phenomenon is increasingly affecting people's decisions, whether or not they want to get their vaccine. We've witnessed a lot of reluctance and resistance around the use of the vaccine. And that ultimately very much impacts, our social well-being, our democracy, the policies being taken into account right now, but also just how quickly we're gonna get back to normal. CBC and Radio-Canada conducted a multi-year analysis last year, I think it was 2019 actually, of 9.6 million tweets from Twitter accounts that have since been deleted, and found that 21,600 tweets from those were troll accounts, and they were spreading messages critical of Canadian pipeline projects and tweets that highlighted divisions over Canada's policies of immigration and refugees. So a lot of times we think that, obviously, I think we've learned over the last year that Canada is immune to these effects. And while they're not as blatant as they may appear in the US, it's still very subtle in the ways that they appear. Both Facebook and Twitter have launched significant measures to counter misinformation. I'm going to share Twitter's Birdwatch initiative now. I think a few folks have probably seen it. 1 second. Okay. Do you guys see this? You see the Twitter one? Okay, great. Thank you, Allison and Nancy. So that's just one of the initiatives that the major social networks are trying to implement. Obviously, Facebook, as some may follow, is having a harder time doing so, but they are doing it in their own ways, and we've worked with them the last federal election. They worked with an agency to flag a lot of groups that were spreading misinformation. They literally hired an agency to work full-time on flagging these groups. And the results actually were successful. So the last federal election actually had a lot less misinformation than anticipated, and intrusion, from kind of foreign and external parties than anticipated. I'm going to continue sharing. So using social media for social impact. Traditionally, so this is where my background comes in. And just for context, one of the things that I noticed I'd say the first month, maybe even 3 weeks of joining the community sector, is how profoundly unequipped a lot of the organizations that we are working with, amongst which, Apathy is Boring at the time, were with the business, marketing, and communication tools in order to help propel their messaging. And so what I witnessed was a lot of organizations were, thinking that, or have this mindset that just because, we do God's work, we don't need to think about how we're packaging it. We don't need to think about the messaging. We don't need to research our audience and be intentional about how we speak to them. And that's all false. And these are ways in which, and things that my team and I consider when creating Apathy is Boring's communication strategy. We consider who we're speaking to at all times. We consider how we outreach at all times. We understand that the way that we outreach to Black youth and BIPOC youth are not going to be the same as the way that we reach, young, white, engaged youth, and are not going to be the same that we reach other racialized. And so our outreach strategy in and of itself encompasses all of these things. The way that we speak on social media, the way that we share things on social media also takes into account all of these things. And so it's really, for me, about how do we use social media and our other marketing methods to increase awareness and knowledge about civic engagement and democracy. So essentially, how do you brand democracy? And that was my challenge coming into Apathy is Boring, because I remember thinking, wow, I've branded, shoes, I've branded gyms, anything under the sun. How am I supposed to now come in and, make civic engagement and democracy sexy? So the 3 C's that we take into consideration, or that I always kind of have at the back of my mind, is to be creative. I cannot stress this enough. If you're working in the nonprofit sector, if you're working in the democracy sector, in any field really, but particularly in the community field, be creative, think outside the box conceptually, communicatively, aesthetically. Aesthetics are important. I know that a lot of folks don't, feel like it is, or feel like they can just kind of throw anything on a poster and pray that, someone catches it. That's not how it works. Our generation, unfortunately, is very focused on aesthetics. We notice these things. We pay attention to the colors used. We pay attention to tone. We are constantly bombarding with messages. And so in order for your message as an organization, or any product conception to reach today's youth, it needs to be creative. Be concrete, and keep your communication simple, relevant, and easy to remember. A lot of folks, particularly a lot of folks that we work with, so the good thing is that, a lot of our partners come to us understanding. So for example, Elections Canada, that we work closely with, Elections Alberta, that we work closely with, come to us understanding that their information, the way that it's positioned, is just not accessible. It's not accessible, from a language standpoint, but also like a decoding standpoint, from a youth culture standpoint. And so they work with us to do so. But essentially, it doesn't take much to understand that youth just need accessible information. Just kind of, and I don't want to use this term, but like dumb it down a little bit. Always think, okay, what is the simplest way that we can communicate what we're saying? And then be consistent. Very simply put, it allows for measurement, it creates accountability, it establishes and repeats, it establishes reputation and maintains your message. So we post currently, I believe, twice a day on social media during federal election periods, or any election that we're actively engaged in working with, partners with. We're posting 3 times on social media a day. There's not a single, that's not true. I was gonna say there's not a single day since we started, my team and I have started working together, we haven't posted. There definitely has been, but maybe not more than a week of inactivity on our platforms, because that allows us to measure. It allows us to use the data. It allows us to know, okay, these kinds of messaging work, these do not. And it really establishes our reputation as our organization, because we're there, we're present, and we're constantly engaging and sharing. Other ways to use social media for social good: promote your project, network with like-minded organizations. So we currently have a community post that we post, I think, once a month, where we highlight different initiatives that are happening in the community. We share facts and figures about either the themes that we're working on, about democracy, about our reports that we produce. We share the stories of our ambassadors and why they choose to join our programs. We connect with our donors and our sponsors and create posts to specifically address what we do with them. We gratify our community. We gather feedback, but also, and I think a lot of folks know apathy is boring for this, our meme game is strong. Bottom line, one does not simply ignore social media, particularly if you're looking to work with youth, if you're serving youth, if you have youth in your organization. It's simply today in 2021 not possible to not be active on social media or not have some form of a social media plan and attain the reach and the audience that you are capable of attaining. Because a lot of folks, again, have these amazing ideas, these amazing initiatives, but they don't know how to communicate them on social media. And so the message gets lost. This is some example of some content that we share. This speaks to the importance of accessible information. So it's the Democracy Dictionary that we created for the last federal election, where we were literally just taking terms that we use in democracy and reframing them in kind of funny youth culture-y way. So this one says, it describes the word bill, and then the description is, no, not dollar bills in the Wu-Tang sense. A bill is a proposed new law introduced within a legislator that has not been adopted or approved yet. Once a bill becomes a law, it is no longer a bill. It's then called an act. And so these for us are ways of taking these big terms that oftentimes are thrown around in the media and again, deconstructing them. This, believe it or not, is one of our most shared tweets the last federal election. So we went out of our way to create the most amazing resources. We created these, packages, and thinking that, these videos, we invested tens of thousands of dollars in these creative videos, yet the most shared tweet was this one. And for me, again, this speaks on the importance of simplicity, on the importance of humor, youth culture, and just like keeping it light. The message is to get out the vote. This is a funny way of saying, get out the vote. And I believe we got like 200,000 impressions on this. Our first time campaign times Elections Canada. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. One second. Should show up here. Give me a sec. Here you go. So needless to say that that was a very risque campaign. And I remember submitting it to Elections Canada and literally being like, oh my gosh, am I gonna lose my job? But no, they were very receptive. They thankfully very much trust us, and they don't question us much at this point in our relationship. But this is something, you know, very risky and very, you know, different that we decided to do. But again, the message went out, and it was funny, it was accessible. It really kind of hit the spot, no pun intended. Hassan says, DJ, you are so right. Cannot stress enough how apathy's boring communication style makes their message memorable and digestible. The aesthetics, consistency, succinctness all contribute to the message landing and sticking. I appreciate that, Hassan. Thank you so much. Okay, and I am almost done, I believe, with the presentation, which is right on time. Do you see this, Nancy? Great. Great. Done. So I'm just going to maybe take Allison's first point, her last question in regards to getting, you know, young people to vote and get out. I think it really, again, it depends on the type of young people. It's really important to not group youth as a monolith, and, you know, take the time to understand that we are very different. Both, you know, from a cultural standpoint, from a values standpoint. Yes, we're all young people, but we all kind of also have our very, you know, distinct identities. And so depending on who we speak with, again, we our levels of intervention are different. So our vote campaigns are really kind of mass and broad, and so it's light, and we try to keep it as light and accessible as possible because you know, the chances of it landing on the right person are broader. When it comes to engaging with BIPOC youth and racialized youth, we're a little bit more intentional with our community partners who already have relationship with these youth. And so we never, ever have the pretentiousness to claim that, you know, we can reach all youth. We cannot. We absolutely cannot. And we have community partners who do that and do it well, and we work actively with them to engage youth in different ways and engage the youth, you know, that they serve in different ways to get them out. Our RISE program, again, works a little bit more long-term to affect that kind of one cognitive change and emotional relationship to the system, and just kind of building more trust. And then we can ask them to vote. So I think for me, it's really a matter of knowing who your audience is, and then speaking their language, going to get them where they are. We never presume that, you know, unengaged youth are going to come find us. That's not going to happen. Never going to happen. So we're intentional about going to where they are. We go to concerts, we go to festivals, we go to malls, we go to universities, you name it, wherever youth are, you'll find us there, because if they're not engaging with the system, they're sure as hell not going to be intentional about going out and finding us. So it's important to be active in seeking out your audience if there are folks who are already, you know, disconnected. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, DJ, for your wonderful presentation. I've been educated immensely now. But there's a question in the chat by Zier. Though I think I can direct this question to you. He asked, can you walk us through what Amplify is doing to mobilize young people to vote with the potential of snap election? I'll direct this one to you to ask, like, what is Apathy is Boring doing to mobilize young people to vote with the potential of a snap election that may come this year?
Tomorrow. Well, so we've actively actually starting our communications campaign with Elections Canada, which is very, I mean, it's great, but it's, whereas last year we had a full year to prepare, you know, we had a month with them to kind of whip something together. not be able to travel and not be able to have our street teams is particularly difficult. But we're working on, having more digital spaces. Over the last year, we've been intentional about creating spaces online for youth together. So through our Table Topics event, so hosting more of those as the elections come to play in order to strengthen our community and really kind of build our digital community in order to then ask them to go out and vote. We have obviously a communications campaign and a video campaign being put into place. We always do these, like, I don't know if, for the folks who are familiar or not, but we have these like vote survival kits that we tend to pass out at in person, that we're now kind of trying to see, okay, how do we get these out to youth now that we're all stuck at home? We'll figure out a way, but essentially we're really banking on digital engagement and building our digital community, and then finding creative ways to still engage face to face, because that's key.
Yeah, definitely. And even to add on to that, Amplify, well, it really depends on what the next team does, but the focus is on, holding events and, talking to students on our campus to kind of really engage and have that open discussion and have even uncomfortable discussions. And then, kind of like, how your vote kind of matters. And the Democratic Engagement Exchange is also we'll be kind of working with Elections Canada as well, just to kind of like prepare for the any like upcoming election. Okay, and to move on to a next question, somebody asked, for marginalized people who have barriers to becoming those uptakers that you're talking about, what can be done about this?
Mentorship is really, really important. I mean, one, seeking mentorship. So if you are a marginalized youth who wants to become an uptaker, seeking mentors in that field that can kind of take you on, seeking organizing homes. So I stress the importance of finding an organization with whom you can, organize with and kind of stick with long term. And then, apathy is boring I'm dropping it as like a here, but we're currently working on our Build program, which will be intended to be an incubator for youth who are seeking to run for office. And we're targeting unengaged youth specifically, because, there are existing ways to run for office, for folks out there who aren't typically engaged, and none for youth. Even less for unengaged youth or marginalized youth who, for me personally, and I think for us as an organization, have so much to contribute to a lot of the policy discussions that are happening right now.
Yeah. Do feel free to pop your question in the chat as we keep going through our Q&A. But the next question for you is, is social media movement more or less effective than in person? Can it purely be a digital movement, and can action still happen online?
For sure. I think I covered that a little bit earlier. I think for me, these are where these nuances happening, and that the importance of formal and informal engagement, right? I think so much can happen online. So much has happened online and social media, quite frankly, right now, especially as we're all locked down in front of our screens 24/7, they probably have more impact than ever. However, it's also important to remember that we have elected officials in office who are supposed to be following what's happening and then implementing change, and whom we should constantly hold accountable to their promise to serve, but also to their jobs. I think we forget that, our salaries pay these folks. And so how are we taking what's happening online and then translating that to in person by holding and questioning and conversing with our elected officials? It could be a tweet. Literally, it could be a tweet. It could be a quick email. There are so many, like, I don't know, last summer there were so many like quick email templates that you can send out. It could be a phone call. We currently have a Women in Politics IG live series happening, and one youth that's an MP in one of our local boroughs was saying that she answers her phone calls. Every single phone call she gets, she answers, and people are always so shocked that she answers. And she said, well, if you called, you know that I answered, but it's mostly like elderly people who call and they're like, hello, and there's snow and there's snow removal. And she was like, okay, I'll get snow removal. And we even had, one of our own staff members last year who realized that the snow removal was so slow on her street. And she had never written to her elected official. And she's like, you know what, let me do something about this because I voted this person in. And she wrote to him on Facebook, not even an email. She literally found his Facebook page and was like, yo, like it's been 2 weeks, my street is full. What are you guys doing? The next day, he responded to her Facebook. The next day, their snow was removed. And so I think that we are, because of that, again, very, rightful mistrust that we have, we don't even try to engage with our elected officials. And so we presume that it doesn't work. And so for me, again, healthy democracy is digital engagement and other forms of informal engagement mixed with formal interactions with the systems in place. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, that's something I need to keep in mind. If something is wrong, I'm gonna send an email. I'm gonna call them up.
I'm literally constantly looking at my street now. I'm like, how's my street doing?
Yeah. So another question for you is, where can we get involved with Apathy is Boring?
That's a good question. So if you are a youth aged 18 to 30, and you want to get a little more engaged in your community, again, we are in Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, Halifax, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. Our RISE program applications actually open up on April 12th. If you want to get involved like at a deeper level and just kind of, you're like, I want to get involved, but I'm not sure where to start. What do I do? RISE is really for you. If you're more engaged, if you're already, the president of the university club, RISE is not for you. However, you can definitely become a volunteer with us once our street teams open up. And we're also looking at, other ways to which we can open up volunteer opportunities, because this question comes up a lot. And so we're seeing, okay, can we have folks, either open clubs in their local communities? So we're exploring different ways, but right now, becoming a volunteer at our street teams and becoming a RISE ambassador are the two main ways to get involved with us.
So another person asks, what is your favorite part of the position and your organization?
Oh, that's a really good question. The favorite part of my position has to be the creativity that our team gets to exercise, but for a cause. So we have these really fun, really creative brainstorming sessions, and we're like, okay, how do we change the world? And, the great thing is we actually have the resources to act on a lot of our ideas. And so it's very heartwarming for me, not only to be able to kind of support my team in their amazing decisions, because we have such amazing ideas. And so being able to kind of give them the free reins is great for me as a team leader. And then I think as a communications team, just really finding ways to, creative ways, to speak to youth where they are. How are we not doing it? How are we maximizing it? How can we change things? We've been doing this for too long. How can we do this differently? And then as an organization, I mean, we are 30 people, most of us averaging, 25 to 30 years old, leading a $4 million organization, full-time staff, amazing culture. It's really something to be reckoned with. And I really wish that folks can witness the leadership that we have as an organization. Every single youth that is involved with Apathy is Boring comes out even, a much better leader, because we create these spaces for youth to be able to lead. And it really goes to show that if you give us the opportunity, we can deliver. It's very simple. Give us the opportunity, give us the resources. We got the resources. I mean, we've always had a little bit of resources, but over the last 5 years, we've been tremendously funded. And so we've been able to take what we've had and build on even more and keep building and keep growing and keep growing. because what you give a group of youth, most of us POC, we're predominantly POC in the org, but give us that opportunity and see what we can do with it. And a lot of folks, it's funny because a lot of we'll post things sometimes and folks will get upset because they're like, oh, this is AVE, so African American Vernacular English, or like, oh, like you guys this is Black Talk, and I'm like, people presume that Apathy is Boring is, a completely, white-led organization. And it's quite funny to us every time because we're like, wow, if people actually saw who was behind this machine, it's literally a group of diverse, genderly diverse, culturally diverse folks who are just killing shit so much that people have a hard time believing who we are, to be honest. So that's also very fun. That was a winded answer, but yeah.
No, I love that. And we'll take one more question. So this person says, I really like how you said the informal forms of political activism, like even veganism or using a hashtag. Which space is better, informal or formal? Which one should we get involved with?
Both. My answer to that will always, always, always be both, but both in your own ways. I think for me, where folks get lost and where a lot of kind of social tensions happen is that everybody thinks that they need to be a shaker. You know what I mean? If you're a shaker, everybody's like, well, everybody should be organizing and everybody should be on the street protesting. If you're a maker, you're like, oh, everybody should get involved with an organization and everybody. And if you're an uptaker, you're like, oh, well, we take the decision. It's like, actually, everybody is needed. If you are an artist, please do what you can within that sphere. If you're a singer, I mean, that's still art. If you're a young professional in technology, see how you can create change in that sphere. If you're working at the corporate level, how can you create change there? So for me, it's really informal in the spaces that you are in. You don't have to be doing what everybody is doing. That's a very important reminder for myself personally, but I think as a generation that we need to have. Just because you see everybody posting something, just because you see everybody doing something, if that doesn't speak to you, if that's not your most authentic way of organizing, find the most authentic way, but find your lane. So long as everybody is on their lane and everybody keeps their foot on the grass, we'll get there. What's dangerous is that everybody thinks that we should all be in one lane. We shouldn't. Change doesn't happen in one lane. Change is a multi-lane highway. So find your lane, keep your foot on the gas, and we'll get there. And then as you're keeping your foot on the gas in your own lane, also engage with the systems that have the power to kind of propel us forward as a machine. Do you know what I mean? So we can keep our foot on the gas and we'll get there slowly and slowly. But by engaging with the systems and demanding and holding our elected officials accountable and playing, quote unquote, the game, we learn the game and we can master the game. And that's when change is even propelled even faster.
Yeah, that's great. And that leads us to the end of our time. I'm sorry to cut this conversation off so, well, not off so short, but it's such an engaging conversation and I'd love to talk more about it. But thank you so much, DJ, for leading us through this.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for joining.